Imagine a warrior for whom the sword is not merely a weapon but a living soul, an extension of his own spirit. Imagine a man who would slice open his own belly rather than face the shame of defeat, who carried two blades as symbols of his soul, and who served his lord with a loyalty so absolute that death was preferable to betrayal. This was the samurai, the aristocratic warrior of feudal Japan, and for nearly 1,000 years he was the embodiment of honor, steel, and discipline. The word itself tells the story of service. Samurai derives from the ancient Japanese verb saburau, meaning to serve or to be on guard. In the early Middle Ages, it referred to those who attended the nobility in the imperial palace. But as Japan transformed, so did the meaning. By the time of the great shogunates, the samurai had become something far more. A hereditary class of warriors who ruled Japan, shaped its culture, and forged a legacy that continues to captivate the world to this day. To understand the samurai, one must understand that they were never simply soldiers. They were poets and philosophers, calligraphers and tea ceremony masters, politicians and parents. The ideal samurai was not merely a killer, but a cultivated gentleman, equally at home composing a death poem before battle as he was wielding his katana in the thick of combat. This fusion of the martial and the aesthetic, the violent and the refined, lies at the heart of what it meant to be a samurai. The origins of the samurai class lie in the gradual militarization of Japan's provincial nobility. During the Heian period, 794–1185, the imperial court in Kyoto grew increasingly detached from the realities of governing a sprawling countryside. Powerful local clans, the Minamoto and the Taira foremost among them, began to assemble armed retainers to protect their lands and assert their interests. These early warriors were primarily mounted archers, skilled in the art of Kyuba no Michi, the way of the horse and bow, which would later evolve into the more comprehensive code of Bushido. The imperial government, recognizing its inability to maintain order through conscript armies, gradually delegated military authority to these provincial warriors. By the late Heian period, the great clans had become private military powers in their own right, their influence extending far beyond their home provinces. When the Taira and Minamoto clashed in the Genpei War, 1180–1185, the outcome would determine the future of Japan for centuries to come. Minamoto no Yoritomo emerged victorious, and in doing so, fundamentally altered the structure of Japanese government. Rather than ruling through the existing imperial bureaucracy, he established a parallel military government, a bakufu, or tent government, in Kamakura. The emperor remained in Kyoto as a figurehead, but real power now resided with the shogun and his samurai retainers. Japan had entered its feudal age. For the samurai who served Yoritomo, this meant formal recognition of their status and rights. Those who held land and swore direct allegiance to the shogun became gokenin, housemen, entitled to protection and consideration in exchange for military service. This relationship of lord and vassal, of mutual obligation and absolute loyalty, would define samurai life for the next 7 centuries. The life of a samurai began at birth, and in some ways even before. When a boy was born into a samurai family, his father would place a sword beside the infant, a symbolic declaration of the child's destiny. Very rarely would a son ignore this calling to take up another profession. From his earliest years, he would be never separated from the sword, sleeping with it beside his pillow so that he was always ready to fight, always prepared to die. When he eventually passed from this world, his sword would rest beside his body. The two never truly parted, even in death. Training began in childhood, often as young as 3 or 5, when boys were given their first wooden swords and taught the basics of stance and grip. Wealthier families sent their sons to special academies where they were tutored in literature, the arts, and military skills. But most training happened within the family, passed from father to son, grandfather to grandson, through generations of accumulated wisdom. The martial education was relentless. One famous story tells of a master who would strike his students with a wooden sword at random moments throughout the day and night, while they ate, while they slept, while they attended to their most private needs, until they learned to never, ever relax their guard. A samurai must be always alert, always ready, always prepared for death to arrive at any moment. In the early centuries, samurai were primarily known as horse-riding archers. Firing a bow from a galloping horse was extraordinarily difficult, requiring years of constant practice to master. Young warriors trained on special courses, shooting at targets while their horses thundered along at full speed. Some practiced on targets tethered to poles that could be swung to simulate moving enemies. For a time, living dogs were used as moving archery targets until the shogun finally abolished the cruel practice. But it is the sword for which the samurai are most famous, the curved, single-edged katana that has become an icon of Japanese culture. A samurai never wore his katana alone. Always, tucked into his sash beside it, was the shorter wakizashi, the companion sword. Together, these two blades were known as the daisho, meaning large and small, and they were the physical symbol of the samurai's status. Only members of the warrior class had the right to wear them. The swords themselves were works of art, forged by master smiths whose skills were legendary. The problem facing any sword maker is balancing hardness and flexibility. A blade hard enough to keep an edge will be brittle and prone to breaking, while a flexible blade will bend rather than break, but won't hold its sharpness. Japanese smiths solved this through an ingenious process. They used tamahagane, a special steel smelted from iron sand, and carefully controlled the carbon content through repeated heating and folding. A single blade might be folded back on itself a dozen times or more, creating thousands of microscopic layers that combined hardness with resilience. The result was renowned the world over for its strength, its sharpness, and its deadly beauty. Beyond the sword, samurai employed a variety of other weapons. The naginata, a curved blade mounted on a long wooden shaft, was particularly effective against cavalry, allowing a foot soldier to strike at riders from a safe distance. The yari, or spear, became increasingly important in later periods as infantry tactics evolved. And from the 16th century onward, samurai adopted firearms, Portuguese arquebuses that they learned to manufacture themselves with astonishing speed. Though the gun is not traditionally associated with the samurai in popular imagination, it was a major influence on Japanese warfare from that point forward. The armor of a samurai was as distinctive as his swords. Early samurai wore yoroi, heavy armor designed for mounted combat, with large shoulder guards and an elaborate helmet. Foot soldiers wore dumaru, a closer-fitting, lighter style. Over time, as samurai increasingly fought on foot, the distinctions blurred, and a modified form of dumaru became standard for all. The helmet, or kabuto, was made from metal plates riveted together, often with decorative crests displaying the warrior's clan symbol. Higher-ranking samurai added elaborate flourishes, horns, antlers, family crests in gold. Some helmets included metal masks, menpo depicting fierce demon faces with moustaches and beards made from horsehair. These masks served both practical and psychological purposes. They protected the face from cuts, and they terrified enemies who saw them. Beneath the armor, a samurai wore a one-piece undergarment, then a kimono, then loose-fitting trousers called hakama. A padded cap helped distribute the weight of the heavy iron helmet. The armor itself, though it appears fragile to modern eyes, little laminated plates strung together with silk cords, was remarkably effective. The cords made it flexible and relatively light, while the lacquer coating the plates made them waterproof. A samurai needed to be able to move quickly, to run through muddy fields, to jump walls, to carry his armor folded flat in special boxes when necessary. But equipment alone did not make a samurai. At the core of the samurai's identity was Bushido, the way of the warrior, the moral code that governed his life and shaped his death. The term itself is first attested in the 17th century, but the ideals it represents are far older, stretching back to the Kamakura period and beyond. Bushido is often described as a single, unified code that all samurai followed. The reality is more complex. There was never one Bushido, but many, evolving across centuries and varying between clans and individuals. What a samurai in the violent Sengoku period believed about honor and duty was quite different from what his counterpart in the peaceful Edo period believed. The code was a living thing, adapting to circumstance while maintaining certain core principles. At its heart, Bushido demanded absolute loyalty to one's lord. The samurai was momo no fu, one who serves, and that service was the foundation of his identity. If a lord could not count on the loyalty of his vassals, the entire feudal system would collapse. This loyalty often extended to death, and beyond. Should a samurai's lord be killed, it was his duty to seek vengeance, even at the cost of his own life. The most famous embodiment of this principle is the story of the 47 Ronin. In 1701, their lord, Asano Naganori, was provoked into drawing his sword within the shogun's palace. A capital offense. He was ordered to commit seppuku, ritual suicide, and his samurai became Ronin, masterless warriors. For 2 years, they waited and planned, pretending to have abandoned all honor. Then, on a snowy winter night, they stormed the mansion of the man who had caused their lord's downfall, killed him, and placed his head on their lord's grave. They had fulfilled their duty of vengeance, but they had also violated the law by acting without official sanction. The shogunate, caught between public sympathy for the Ronin and the need to uphold order, allowed them to die honorably by their own hands rather than be executed as common criminals. All 47 committed seppuku. This story illustrates another essential element of Bushido, the willingness to die. A samurai was expected to be ready for death at any moment, to accept its possibility without fear, and to choose it over dishonor. This attitude was not a morbid fascination with death, but a practical necessity. A warrior who feared death could not fight effectively. A warrior who valued his own life above his duty would fail his lord. The ultimate expression of this principle was seppuku, ritual suicide by disembowelment. The practice had ancient roots but became increasingly formalized over time. A samurai might commit seppuku for many reasons: to avoid capture in battle, to atone for failure, to protest a lord's unjust actions, or to restore honor to his family after disgrace. The ritual was precisely choreographed. The samurai would dress in white robes, write a death poem, and be presented with a short sword wrapped in paper. He would then take the blade and cut open his own abdomen from left to right, with a final upward cut at the end. This act was excruciatingly painful, and few samurai were left to die slowly from it. A second samurai, the kaishaku, would stand behind him and behead him with a single stroke moments after the cut was made, ending his suffering. Western observers were often horrified by seppuku, seeing it as barbaric, but within the logic of Bushido, it made perfect sense. A samurai's honor was more valuable than his life. By dying in this controlled, ritualized way, he could preserve that honor for himself and his family, transforming failure into a kind of victory. The same principle explained why samurai in battle would fight to the death rather than surrender. Capture meant dishonor, and dishonor was worse than death. Yet Bushido was not only about death. It also demanded truthfulness, embodied in the saying, "A bushi has no second word." A samurai's promise was absolute. Once given, it could never be broken. This was not truth for its own sake, but truth as an expression of uncompromising manliness. A samurai who broke his word was no samurai at all. Generosity to a defeated foe was also valued. History records many instances of samurai showing mercy to worthy enemies, recognizing that courage and skill deserved respect regardless of which side they served. This was not weakness, but the confidence of the truly strong who could afford to be magnanimous. At the same time, there were darker aspects to the samurai code. The right of kirisute gomen allowed a samurai to strike down a commoner who had dishonored him, a legal privilege that reinforced the rigid class hierarchy of feudal Japan. Sujigiri, crossroads killing, was the practice of testing a new sword on a random passerby. It became so rampant in the early Edo period that the shogunate finally banned it. These contradictions between honor and violence, refinement and brutality, service and privilege are essential to understanding the samurai. They were not simple paragons of virtue, but complex human beings shaped by a society that valued both the sword and the brush, both loyalty and pragmatism. The training that produced such men extended beyond martial skills. Samurai were expected to be educated in literature, history, and philosophy. During the peaceful Edo period, when the Tokugawa shogunate brought stability to Japan after centuries of civil war, these academic skills became especially important. Samurai served as bureaucrats and administrators as well as warriors, and they needed the learning to match. Some masters warned against dwelling too much on words and paintings, fearing it would soften the mind. But the ideal remained the bunbu ryodo, the pen and the sword in accord, the warrior who could fight with either weapon as circumstances demanded. This ideal produced figures like Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary swordsman who was also a master calligrapher and painter, and who wrote The Book of Five Rings, a classic treatise on strategy that is still studied today. The training also inculcated frugality and self-discipline. The code of Kato Kiyomasa, a celebrated general of the late 16th century, prescribed strict rules. Military exercises from 6 in the morning, cotton garments, never extravagant, unhulled rice as the staple diet, no dancing or poetry composing, which were considered effeminate. A man born a samurai should live and die sword in hand. Unless he is thus trained in time of peace, he will be useless in the hour of stress. To be brave and warlike must be his invariable condition. This emphasis on martial readiness reflected the realities of a society where peace could turn to war at any moment. For centuries, Japan was racked by civil conflict, the bloody struggles of the Nanboku-cho period, the endless wars of the Sengoku Warring States era, the clashes between great houses that reshaped the political landscape. In such a world, the samurai's skills were not abstract ideals, but practical necessities. The great turning point came in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, when three successive unifiers, Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu, brought the warring states under a single rule. The Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 established Tokugawa supremacy, and by 1615, with the fall of Osaka Castle, the last opposition was crushed. Japan entered the Edo period, 2.5 centuries of peace under the Tokugawa shogunate. For the samurai, peace was a mixed blessing. No longer needed for constant warfare, they became administrators, scholars, and ceremonial figures. Their martial skills, once essential for survival, risked atrophying from disuse. Some worried that the warrior class was becoming soft, more concerned with etiquette and poetry than with the sword. The very concept of Bushido was formalized during this period, perhaps as a way of preserving warrior values in an age that no longer demanded them. Yet the samurai adapted, as they always had. They staffed the shogunate's bureaucracy, governed the provinces, and maintained order in a peaceful society. Their swords remained at their sides, symbols of their status, even if they were rarely drawn in anger. The daisho distinguished them from commoners, reminders of a heritage that could never be forgotten. This world ended not with a sword stroke, but with the arrival of foreign ships. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States Navy steamed into Edo Bay with a fleet of black-hulled warships, demanding that Japan open its borders to trade. The Tokugawa shogunate, weakened by internal strife and unable to resist foreign pressure, reluctantly agreed. The arrival of the West set in motion events that would destroy the samurai class. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 overthrew the shogunate and restored nominal power to the emperor. The new government, determined to modernize Japan and resist Western imperialism, abolished the feudal system. In 1871, the domains of the daimyo were dissolved. In 1873, universal conscription was introduced, creating a modern army of commoners. In 1876, the wearing of swords was forbidden to all but military officers in uniform. The samurai class, as a legal entity, ceased to exist. For many samurai, the transition was devastating. They had been trained for war, not commerce. Their honor prohibited them from engaging in trade. Some adapted, finding roles in the new government, military, or business world. Many did not. The Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by the legendary samurai Saigo Takamori, was a final doomed attempt to preserve the old ways. When it failed, the age of the samurai was truly over. Yet the samurai did not disappear. Their descendants continued to shape Japanese society as officers in the imperial army, as executives in the new corporations, as intellectuals and politicians. The values of Bushido, adapted and reinterpreted, lived on in Japanese culture. During the Meiji period, Nitobe Inazo wrote Bushido, the soul of Japan, presenting the samurai code to an international audience and framing it as the moral foundation of the Japanese people. Though his work romanticized and idealized a more complex reality, it cemented the samurai's place in global imagination. In the 20th century, Bushido was invoked to inspire the imperial armed forces, its emphasis on loyalty and death before surrender resonating with the militarism of the era. Kamikaze pilots, carrying out suicidal attacks, were presented as heirs to the samurai tradition, though the reality was far more complicated, and many pilots were conscripts with little connection to the warrior class. Today, the samurai live on in countless forms, in films and novels, in video games and anime, in martial arts dojos that trace their lineage back centuries. The katana is admired as a work of art. The armor is displayed in museums. The stories of great warriors and their epic battles are told and retold. But the real samurai were more than these romantic images suggest. They were complex, contradictory, human. The samurai who composed death poems before battle also maintained detailed financial records. The warriors who spoke of honor and loyalty also schemed for advantage and betrayed their lords when it suited them. The class that prided itself on martial virtue also produced some of Japan's finest poets, painters, and philosophers. They were not perfect embodiments of a code, but people shaped by a code, struggling to live up to its demands while navigating the messy realities of life. In the end, perhaps the most remarkable thing about the samurai is not any individual achievement, but the endurance of their legacy. For nearly 1,000 years, they shaped Japanese history and culture. And when their time passed, they left behind not just swords and armor, but a set of values, loyalty, honor, discipline, courage, that continue to resonate in Japan and far beyond. The samurai lived by the sword, and many died by it. But they also lived by something more, a code that demanded they be more than just killers, that required them to cultivate their minds as well as their bodies, that insisted on honor as the highest good. It was an impossible ideal, perhaps, but it was an ideal worth having, and in striving toward it, the samurai became something more than warriors. They became legends.